Have you ever done that thing where you've gone and bought something pre-release because there's an amazing deal on, and then as it comes to get the product, you get that sense of buyer's remorse because it doesn't live up to your expectations? I have. I backed Shenmue 3 on Kickstarter. And yes, I'm putting a loaded statement up front, but I do expect that by the end of this video, many people who've backed this product are going to be feeling that. And don't get me wrong, I think this is a great printer, nay, an amazing printer in many ways. But the early marketing has only shown us what the printer does do and does well. It hasn't clearly shown us what the cost of that truly is. So that's what I'm here for. That's what I'll show you. So hi, I'm Ross, and this is Fohammer Videos. Right, I want to rapid fire through this first section so that we can get onto the meat of this video, and I certainly don't want it to be 30 minutes long. Unboxing is simple, you take it out of the box, although with this box you have to lift it out of the top, which is a little bit awkward than other brands who let you slide it out of the side of the box, which makes it much easier to just have it stood upright and less risk of damage. Again, it's an unboxing, you're not going to struggle, but when other brands are doing it better, it's just a minor annoyance. So the first thing to talk about is the resolution, and yes, this is a 12K printer, but is it really? The resolution stated on the website for the LCD in this is 11520 by 5120. However, true 12K, the recognised standard, is actually 12,228 pixels by 6,480. But honestly, it's a minor thing. Manufacturers of screens will round up or down just to get to the nearest thousand. The same thing happened with 4K and 8K printers. Some printers would have under 4,000 pixels on the x-axis, some would have over. It's just how they do it. This is still the closest thing we've got to 12K yet. But you may or may not be aware from other videos that this screen has rectangular pixels, not square pixels. The reason for this is probably because whoever makes the display, that's how they make it, and this is the one that the manufacturers are able to get their hands on at the moment. It hasn't been developed this way for an intentional reason, it's probably just how it can be done in a cost-effective way. But that means we've got fewer pixels on the y-axis because these pixels are tall. On a typical square pixel display, if you had 11,520 pixels on the x-axis, then you should be getting 6,480 on the y. So whilst the original marketing claim was that this was a 19 micron printer, therefore beating the original king of the hill, the Sonic Mini 8K, the truth is that's only on the x-axis. On the y-axis, you have 24 micron pixels, which is actually 2 microns larger than the aforementioned competitor. But honestly, you're not going to see it. Like, it's 2 microns. And the other head-scratchy thing about the screen size is that on the website it says that you get a 10.1 inch LCD. But if you go to screen-size.info and type in the build volume, which is the width of the printer, it'll give you the height of a 16 by 9 inch screen. It's coming out as a 9.8 inch screen, and I don't know enough about screens to have anyone's argument to say, yeah, they calculate the frame size as well or something like that, but to me, display area / build size is what this should be calculated by. Okay, let's talk about what's in it. So you get dual linear rails, which is really good for stability. You get a pretty thin and flimsy Z-rod, but again, it seemed fine. And you get a laser etched build plate, which if you like them, that's great. I always find them harder to get prints off with, but they stick easier. So, you know, double-edged sword, that one. It's pretty quiet in operation, the fan's on the bottom, but also on the bottom you'll find little plastic feet. These aren't rubber feet, so it means if you've got a smooth surface that your printer's sitting on, much like I do in this video, it slides across the desk pretty easily, which unfortunately with the super fast, really thin resin means it sloshes around everywhere, which is something you've got to be cautious about. It's easy to fix this problem, just sit the printer on a silicone cleaning mat. You really should get one of those anyway, they're really helpful. And then onto the vat, which is a fairly decent size. It holds about 700 milliliters of resin at a guesstimate, but you'll notice that it's got this opaque film on the bottom, and this is the new, more bendy, more flexible ACF film that everyone's touting now in their new printers because the release force is much less than the previous FEP or PFA. But does this cloudiness affect prints? Well, we'll get onto that. And you get your usual box of stuff, which comes with your power supply, a plastic scraper, a metal scraper, some gloves, a mask, some tissue. You also get the cleaning things for the screen, so you can put the screen protector on it, and you get your USB drive, which again is one of these cheap ones that may or may not break on you. I always like to replace them with a decent quality one as soon as I can. And the USB port is on the side at the back because it's cheaper for manufacturers to do this than put an extension cable in and put it at the front. This bothers me because with printers like this, there are fans underneath, so I can put my wash and cure stations right up next to this printer and then it saves space on my desk. But I can't because there's a big USB port in the way. If this bothers you, then I'm glad I mentioned it. If it doesn't, then you can just ignore this part of the video. You don't have to have a go at me in the comments about it. It's not for everyone. It bothers me, it bothers other people. Just move on to the next bit. I do want to call out though that the UI has been massively improved since the previous generation of Photon printers. Everything is now much sexier and it's also a little bit cleaner and it goes through several device checks on boot up. Now to be honest, yeah, like Vog said in his video, this is kind of pointless and is just one of those glitz and glamour things it goes through to try and tell you this printer's working. But maybe in the future this will be useful if you're ever speaking to support, they get more of an indication to know what failed, so there is benefit there. But yeah, the UI is now sleeker and tidier with your main options on the left hand side. You can jump to any section most of the time, unless you're nested deep in a menu and then you start getting confused because the left hand side menu changes. But again, it's easy once you get used to it. It's certainly one of the better UIs that Anycubic have ever done, and in fact, most brands, it's better than most brands have ever done. There's nothing in there that I'd say is poorly translated, but there are things in there that I'd say could be translated better. Now, as I mentioned before, you do get a screen protector with this and all the things in the box so that you can put it on there without any dust underneath, and I was successful this time in getting it on. Although, annoyingly, once again, they've put this so it goes over and beyond the entire screen, which leaves a little air gap around the edge, and I'm sure now that I've seen that it actually prints in this area, would distort the image in those areas just a little bit. You can easily guide the vat into place with the pegs on the bottom of the vat and the recesses in the base of the printer, and then all you need to do is slide the bolts in there, which perfectly fit into exactly where they need to go. The printer also comes with built-in Wi-Fi, though I struggled with this at first because when following the instructions and pressing the refresh button, nothing happened on screen, but I just left it after a couple of prints, and when I tried it later, it worked absolutely fine. I connected it to my phone where you can control it using the Anycubic app, and make sure you get the correct app that's actually got the QR code on screen here, not the Anycubic cloud app, because that doesn't work. But this app is fairly basic, it gives you notifications on print status or errors, and it's not too over cumbersome, which I've complained about with other 3D printer apps. Creality. And now, before I printed anything, I wanted to make sure that the screen worked and wasn't damaged in any way, so I ran a couple of exposure tests just to make sure I've got clear light uniformity and images are rendering correctly. All of this is done within the UI on the screen, which is really, really useful. But when it came to leveling, I got a bit confused. Yes, I know it auto levels, but I still thought you had to tell it to level or do something. I had to flick through the manual to see how you do the leveling process, but it turns out you just don't. You literally just attach the bed, and every time it goes to do a print, it'll level for you. And the way it does this is with a force-sensitive mechanism inside the printer. I don't know enough about this technology to comment too much, but based on the marketing video from Anycubic, it looks like there are springs behind the screen and sensors there to detect when there's pressure added to the screen. Not only is this used for leveling, but it's also used to detect when prints fail and how much resin's in the vat. How they do this, I don't know. It sounds like magic, but yeah, it worked for me. It detected print failures where things had fallen off the plate, and it also detected where I didn't have enough resin in the vat at certain points and wouldn't let me print before I topped it up. And speaking of printing, Anycubic sent me some of their new high-speed resin, which is what they're pushing with this printer. It's the Anycubic M5s, and that S must mean speed because this is being touted as one of the fastest 3D printers out there. So, now you know what the printer does and how it works, but let's see how it performs. This is the real meat of the video that everybody's looking forward to. Anycubic give you a good few tests with this printer, and it's worth understanding what the different ones do. When it says high speed in the test, this is meant to be used with the high speed resin. And the first thing I decided to print was one of their, it's kind of like a weird Fabergé egg orb style thing. But essentially it's just an ornate sphere with the middle cut out. It's got some holes in it to show you how the printer performs, and this printed in 33 minutes. This is insane. And I'm not saying that lightly, there's no doubt about it. This printer with this fast resin is fast, super fast. This sort of print would have normally taken a good few hours, but there are some caveats in here as to why it can be printed so quickly. This is printed at 0.1 millimeters or 100 microns layer height, and typically people print half that size at 50 microns. Me personally, I look at the XY resolution, in this case 24 microns, so I'd want my layer height to roughly match that at 20 microns. So this is already printing 5 times faster than I would print on this machine just through layer height alone. Then you've got this really thin high-speed resin which cures super fast, and the resin's also designed to be easier to peel from whatever release film is at the bottom of the vat. And in this printer, you get the ACF release film, which everybody seems to be either chucking in their printers or selling separately nowadays. And ACF, according to Google, is anisotropic conductive film, whatever that means. But basically, it means that resin can be more easily released from the film with less pulling force than with your typical FEP or PFA or NFEP. And considering when it comes to prints, it's not actually your exposure time that causes the length of the print to go up significantly, it's your lift and retract speeds. So if you can lift faster, then it means you can print significantly faster. One thing I noticed with this printer is when I was going to do my initial print, you can actually choose to print from the USB drive or the internal storage. I had wrongly assumed that when you go to print something, it actually copies the file to the internal storage before the print begins, just in case there's any USB errors. Other printers do this and it's quite smart. But here, during the print, I unplugged the USB drive and it simply stopped and gave me an error on the screen. I couldn't then put the USB drive in and continue. This print was dead. The reason for the internal storage is purely if you send prints to it via Wi-Fi or via the Anycubic app on your phone. I also ran the orb print test again, but this time the one that prints at 50 microns or 0.05 millimeters. And this one took significantly longer, this time 3 hours 42 minutes. But yes, this is half the size in each layer than the previous one. But this is also intended for more standard resin than the fast resin I was using. So things like the lift speed will be much slower and the exposure times are a little bit longer. And when we compare these prints, yes, you can see a difference in them, but it's not significant. And that's what I need to say about this printer. I went to my local hobby store recently, somebody was having a game of Warhammer with their friend and had got some 3D printed miniatures. And it was full of layer and voxel lines, certainly not up to the quality I'm used to with some of these more modern printers, but they were more than happy to play with that proxy model. So if you don't mind this quality loss, then yeah, this is going to be one of the fastest printers out there. The print that really blew me away though, because I had no idea what it was going to look like before I just selected print from the front menu, is this giant ogre model, which is almost the full height of the build plate, and this printed in 1 hour 56 minutes. The full height of the build plate. That's incredible. No matter what way you slice it, this printer is insanely good. The resin, however, not so great. I do need to dial this in a bit more than what the standard settings are that they gave me, but this resin is quite brittle. It very much reminds me, once it's cured, of the properties of Anycubic's old standard resin from about 4 or 5 years ago that I got with the original Photon S. I actually printed this model again using the max settings, and this was the other free test that you get with the printer. I had wrongly assumed that this would have been max detail. I didn't really look at the values of layer height or anything before I clicked print. I just know that this was a 4-hour print versus the 2-hour print I'd just done, so I expected higher quality. Instead, what this print is for is actually just for using with more standard resins than this fast curing resin that we've used here. So again, it's got higher exposure times, it's got a slower lift speed. The end result is that this resin was significantly over-cured, and just trying to get this off the build plate was even worse because I had to hammer and chisel it off, bits flicked and crushed and cracked everywhere, and I even ended up stabbing myself in the back of my hand. Worse still, this version of the model was significantly overexposed and I couldn't remove the supports. It's a pretty decent model, some of the supports on there are questionably placed, but I was able to take most of them off the other version of it. So this test you really should be using only with more standard resins. You shouldn't use the fast resin and over-cure it. It's brittle enough already, and when you over-cure it, it's terrible and, in my case, dangerous. When it came to printing my own models, I did the usual Wolverine bust that I always do from Draftnia Studios just so all my printer reviews are comparable, but then I also took some miniatures from Creature Caster, and I'm kinda sorry, I want to apologise to Creature Caster here, their miniatures are so insanely detailed, this isn't the printer/resin combo to legitimately show them off. So I promise I'll print these again in a future video on something that's going to show us a lot more detail. But when we look at these models, I think we can all reasonably expect that the quality is just not going to be there. I mean, again, I would print at 20 microns, most people would print at 50 microns, and these are at 100 microns. So yeah, you've already got more layer line issues than in any other printer. But at the same time, they're not bad. Like, they're not terrible, and if you're after quick, fast, workable prints, let's say you want to print a miniature army in an afternoon or you know, a huge army in a day, it's certainly possible on this thing, not only your infantry, but your giant monsters and vehicles too. When it comes to the larger flat surfaces, a lot of those layer and voxel lines aren't going to be too obvious anyway. So if you're looking at these prints thinking, yeah, that's fine enough quality for me, or you're somebody who prints typically large things rather than miniatures that you want perfect detail on, then this is a great printer because you can get so much more done in such a short amount of time. If, however, you've already pre-ordered this printer and you expect more than that, maybe stop watching now, just before we go to the next bit. I warned you. I need to preface this next bit by saying I am not negging on this printer. For what this printer does, it does it in a fantastic way, better than I've ever seen before. And what it does is fast prints. But because this is a 12K printer, it deserves to be compared to other printers. And to do this in my reviews, I most frequently use Frozen's Aqua Grey 8K resin because it's really high detail. It's not my favourite resin for practically printing miniatures, but it shows the detail of a printer well. So using the test that I always use, and I've got a video on how you do exposure tests on printers, go and check that out, I created what's called an RERF test, which you can do with pretty much any Anycubic printer. What this does is let you put 8 objects on the build plate, choose your normal exposure time, and it will print the first item at that time and then 0.25 second increments between the next 7. In just one print, you can dial your exposure in to 0.25 seconds. But as soon as my first one of these came off the plate, which started at 1 second, I noticed I was having issues. If you have a look at any of my other printer reviews, you'll actually see that these tests print out incredibly well on 10-inch 8K printers. And to get a balanced exposure, I count the holes and posts, but what I noticed here is this line section at the bottom. When compared to my 8K printers, you can actually see that significantly fewer lines are printed even at 1 second. However, you've also got way too many filled gaps on the opposite side of this. There's only 2 things that can really affect this here, and yes, I checked my lift speeds and I'd also checked my retraction speeds, and you can still do things like anti-aliasing and 2-stage lifting on this printer. And the printer, unlike the Creality one that I wasn't very happy about, is capable of speeds as slow as 1mm a second, which is exactly what this resin normally needs, although with this release film I should arguably be able to up that by 30%. But I was scratching my head. I can do one of 2 things here. I can lower the exposure, which means I will get even fewer of the lines printed, or I can increase the exposure and I'll get more lines printed, but at the cost of recess detail, which are the gaps on the opposite side of this. And you may have seen some of my recent shorts online talking about this, but I had to reach out to other creators just to make sure I'm not missing something stupid. So we already know for a fact that this is a 12K printer, and we can do the math to confirm that the pixels on these at their largest are 24 microns, significantly less than the 28.5 micron prints of 10-inch 8K printers, closer to that of the Sonic Mini 8K, which has 22 micron pixels. So that's a given, we accept that. So what are the other variables in this printer? Well, one is the fact that it auto levels and has a weird spring and sensor system. 2, possibly the screen protector, but I doubt it because these prints are directly in the middle of the screen and it's only the edges that I thought would be bothered. But the third one is the ACF release film. So I'm going to ignore testing removing the screen protector because I like it being on there protecting my expensive printer. But after speaking with Jesse, Vogman, Dennis Wang, the Spotted Painter, and a couple of other people online, we thought that it may be a compression issue, which we've seen in other printers, and because the way this printer works is by pressing on the screen to detect how level it is, that's quite likely to be causing some issues. So I took my usual exposure test and created a raft underneath it. The first one is a control matching the previous prints. The second one is raised 0.5mm, then 1mm, and then 5mm. And I'm sorry, but if you're getting compression issues, 5mm are enough, then sorry, that's not good enough. You shouldn't be getting those issues that deep into a print. So I matched all my lift and retract settings, and I printed this at 1.5 seconds per 30 micron layer, which is exactly the same as what I'd done on previous generation printers. And as you can see, it's significantly overexposed in the recesses. So I printed it again at 1 second per 30 micron layer, and as expected, yes, I now have more gaps in the recesses, but this was at the cost of more raised lines. And people online have said, try different tests, try cones of calibration, try this, try that. And yes, those tests will work, this test will work as well. But if this test, which is comparable to all of my other tests, shows that I either don't get as many raised details, or the cost of those recess details is less than on other printers, then that is what this printer is capable of. It doesn't matter what test I use, they're all going to give me this same result. I either get a bloated model or a model with less detail. And I know this is the case because even with the fast resin, which should really be dialed in, it's overexposed, and when I try and put my mini Wolverine together, it won't slot into place, even though when I print it on any other printer with any other resin, this will just slide in as I expect it to. So look, that's it. The results are, yes, this is a 12K printer, but the details it produces aren't as sharp as what we got on previous generation 8K printers. And the question you're probably asking now is why? Now, unfortunately, the jury is still out on this one. I need to go through and do significantly more tests with it to determine that my hypothesis is correct. But I'm confident, I'm guessing or inferring, I'm professionally guesstimating with a lot of confidence that I'm 98% certain about that the problem is with the ACF film. And that's a good thing. Now, you probably noticed earlier that this ACF film is opaque. It's not clear like most release films. And you may think that, well, that's going to distort light. And I thought the same thing. I thought it when I got the Creality printer that I so famously negged on. But back in that review, when I asked Creality about it, their technicians went, no, you're totally wrong. UV is energy, not light, so it doesn't work like that. But hang on, we use mirrors in DLP printers to reflect this energy. We also use Fresnel lenses in things like the Saturn II to direct this energy. So surely then, if you've got an opaque plastic clear film, just like you would have on a camera diffuser, that's going to diffuse the energy. And look, Creality aren't the only people who've told me that this ACF is energy, not light, and it doesn't affect it. I've heard that from a few places online as well. But the reason I'm loving this printer when I kinda hated on the Creality one is Anycubic have been pretty open with me and clear with me when I've asked them certain things. And they've outright said, no, the speed of this printer doesn't show off the detail as well. And for that, you want the M5. Not the M5s. And yeah, you can go and blame and rage at Anycubic all you want for not making this clear, but let's be fair, when was the last time a car manufacturer told you what their car didn't do? That is why you go to trustworthy independent reviewers. But hey, I could be wrong about this. The issue could be due to the pressure sensitivity compressing the layers throughout the print. It could be that I have a faulty machine, though when I compared Vogg's prints to mine with the tests he did, yeah, they're pretty comparable on the same sort of test. But if it turns out my guess/hypothesis is right, and the ACF film does diffuse ultraviolet rays, then that's good, because it means if you've ordered this printer, all you need to do to get sharper details is replace the ACF with something like PFA. Yes, it won't lift and retract as fast, but you'll still get that detail you expect from a 12K screen. So don't hate on this printer because it does have features that the M5 doesn't, such as the automatic leveling and the failure detection, which is incredibly useful because I can't count the amount of times I've had a print fail halfway through and yet I've still let it run to the finish. This is good because it knows about it, tells you, and even informs you with an app notification. And even though I am 99.9% certain that the print resolution shown in this video and the lines even shown in Vog's video are because of this ACF release film, I can't be 100% until I test it and show you. So in an upcoming video, I'm going to test this when I get my hands on the Anycubic Photon M5. That's the M5, not the M5s that this is. Whether that comes with the old style film or not, at least at that point I'll have two VATs, so I can replace it on one of them and then test both independently. So make sure you subscribe, because that'll probably come out as shorts first and then an independent video, and you probably don't want to miss it if you're considering this printer, which is certainly worth considering. I do want to say thank you for watching. I hope I didn't scare too many people too much, and again, it's just a hope that we can make this sharper with a different release film. I'm not certain yet, but I am going to keep testing to find out how. Stick with me. I want to say thank you for watching, and a huge thanks to our patrons, because without them we wouldn't be able to make content like this. If you want to join them and get your name up in the credits, then see the links down in the description below. Thanks again until next time, be excellent to each other, and be excellent to me as well. I'm trying my best here, so don't be mean down in the comments or I will call you out on it. Anyway, thanks again guys, Fohammer out.